guess he's going to talk about Dynamo, thank God.
Okay, let's start. 2:41, sorry for getting started a minute late. Welcome back. I wanted to touch base with you all about a couple things. First thing is Piazza. Everybody reads Piazza, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everybody reads every post on Piazza like I do, right?
No. Yes.
Why not? You might miss something, right? So I think I would strongly encourage you to read every post on Piazza, maybe just for a second, to see if it's relevant to things you want to know. I don't reply to every post on Piazza, obviously, but I read every post because I want to know what's going on in this class, and I think you should too. So you probably shouldn't have any more confusion about things like readings and midterms and stuff because they're all posted on Piazza. Piazza's searchable. So just, if you want to know when the midterm is, you can go to Piazza and say midterm, and you won't be disappointed. Similarly with everything. So I need to know, and I'm sorry for complaining because this is ridiculous. I need to know that if I post something to Piazza, y'all will see it. Right? So, or if not Piazza, I need to know what the place is that I can post that y'all will see. Yes?
Well, the thing for the assignment was you can make an announcement post where it will bypass all our email settings. So if you make a post about doing like going to the beach, that would cause an announcement post. So some people don't regularly check it, and then you'll get emails.
Yeah, no, so I get it that if it's about something that's happening in the next hour, it behooves me to bypass. But if you have chosen to bypass my emails, that means you need to repeatedly poll Piazza to know what the fuck is going on, right? So if I were you, I wouldn't bypass the emails, and I, the professor, don't have to worry about all the various email settings that y'all have. I just know you will see things. But I see your point. Like if it's like, I need a response in an hour, I need to make it happen fast. But with things like the midterm that I announced on the second class, come on, give me a break. Okay. Speaking of which, one of the things I posted on Piazza is requirements about things you're supposed to read. And I get that the pressure's a little lower, because I haven't done any pop quizzes yet. But this stuff will be on the exam. So instead of embarrassing you and asking for a show of hands, you read it, I'll just tell you that there's a lot of points on the exam riding on you having read the Dynamo paper. So you should probably read the Dynamo paper. And I'm going to assume that you did, and take a few minutes to talk about it. Although I wasn't planning to do like a lecture about Dynamo, I don't love the paper qua paper, but I love how well it connects with this class because it covers like the kitchen sink of topics that we've covered in the class. And so I think it might be fun to just take a moment and enumerate what some of the subjects that we have covered in class are that came up in the Dynamo paper. Because I think it's neat how you see like, we study all these things individually to guarantee these protocols. And in general, an non-trivial distributed system is going to glom together a whole bunch of them. Sometimes when you read some of Google's papers, you're like, wow, this literally has every single distributed protocol I've ever studied in it. Like there's a paper I might send to you later, Spanner. You're like, yeah, it's got Paxos in it, it's got two-phase commit in it, it's got Lamport class, it's got reliable broadcast, two-phase commit. Holy shit, every single protocol we study. Why do distributed systems have to be so complicated? Why does every distributed system require all of the protocols? Dynamo maybe not so much so. But what are some of the like high-level important distributed systems topics that we have talked about that came up in the Dynamo paper? Anybody got any?
Availability.
But just the idea, and this was at the time an extremely controversial stance for them to take. Availability uber alles, right? Availability over everything, right? The idea that they actually set up this thing, it almost seems like they're shooting the moon, right? It's a straw man. They're like, well, the most important thing is to accept rights at all times. Even if you can never serve up a read to that right, even if the rights are going to conflict, cause all kinds of problems, the most important thing that an Amazon storage system does is accept those rights, even if it doesn't know what to do with them. It's more important to do something, as we discussed in beach class, than it is to do the right thing. You're willing to tolerate doing the wrong thing sometimes as long as you never don't do a thing. If somebody wants to put something in the cart, you say, you got it, but even if you're going to forget it. Right? Rather than say, I can't take that right now because I can't guarantee I can store it. You say, no, I got it, and then you throw it in the garbage. Right? Well, the whole systems like Mongo have been developed on this principle, right? Because sometimes it's more fun to just take something and say you did it than actually do it. Yeah?
Is this a case for all NoSQL databases where availability is over everything, or no?
Like, it's a recurring theme among the NoSQL databases because they all were developed during a time when it was believed that strong consistency was not tenable at large scale. But there's exceptions to that, because I think like NoSQL is an umbrella term for every database that was developed in the 2000s that didn't use SQL. But you look at the really popular ones, absolutely. Absolutely, they're privileging availability over consistency, or at the very least, they're quorum systems that give you the tunable knobs, and you would probably tune them to the left and privilege availability over consistency. Yeah?
They also briefly mentioned quorum chain replication.
They mentioned chain replication?
Or it was like
Consistent hashing?
it was with the quorum sort of like reads and writes, like a certain number of nodes.
Right, so quorum replication.
Yeah.
This is a subject we covered in class. Oh, so each class. Let me stop for a second. Each class was awesome. Watched some good video. We mostly stayed on topic. I don't know how readable and sand was for everybody. That's probably the weakest thing about the class, but I think it was a rousing success considering we didn't really have that many other options. Wait, huh?
You do it again.
Well, no, because it's a hardship for some people to get to the beach. It wouldn't be equally fair to everybody. I felt okay about doing it then because it was a hardship no matter what. Right? But it was. I mean, if you want to join my research lab, we do a hiking meeting every quarter, at least once, sometimes twice. So. Grad students, it works great. What?
What's the name of your lab?
Disorderly Labs. Is that, check it out. Yeah, it's one with the cool capital. That's Chaos Cat. Okay, where was I? Right, so beach class was cool. How many of you did not attend beach class but have been able to watch the video? Oh wait, how many of you did not attend beach class and have not watched the video? Please watch the video. That stuff will be on the midterm on Monday. Anybody who attended beach class want to tell us what sort of 3-ish topics we covered in beach class? Cap theorem. Quorum replication.
Availability and reliability.
Availability and reliability. Quantified. And what was the thing we started with? It was kind of the
Chain PBI.
yeah, like chain replication, primary backup replication, with the practical eye towards like when would you choose one or the other, and in particular the way we framed it was why on earth would you ever choose chain replication? Because for almost every scenario you can think of it as a little worse than primary backup. So I'm going to save the punchline and let you all watch the conversation that we had. It was a pretty nice conversation. It took about like 30 minutes of us going back and forth trying to figure out, okay, like what kind of workload would make you choose chain. Okay, so yeah, so cool. Availability is the most important thing. And they also talked about quorum replication. As we saw in each class, quorum replication is a hell of a good way to achieve an available system, right? What do you set? What are your settings? To make a system that's available under partition, any partition, you set W and R to what?
W's
To 1. Right? Why do you set them to 1? Well, because there is a partition, however unlikely it might be. It looks like this, where here's this poor client and a single replica R1, and they can talk to each other, but they can't talk to anybody else. Right? So for this system to be available, if this client tries to do an operation, what has to happen? It has to succeed, or it has to respond, right? It has to be like, okay. Which means if W was any higher than 1, it wouldn't have been available. And similarly, if it was a read operation, same argument, right? So you can tune quorum replication to be available, but in some sense there's only one tuning. Out of all the possible numbers you could have set to W and R, 1 is the only one that gets you available in this scenario, which is certainly a possible partition. Yeah? And so, what does Dyanmo set them to? What would you set it? What would Dyanmo set them to? W or not? One. Well, we said already that it has to be available, right? So clearly, these are the settings that Dynamo uses, even if they don't say so specifically. What else? Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, they talking about load balancing versus distributed hashing algorithms.
Okay, we haven't discussed that in class, but I'll put that up there anyway. Consistent hashing as a means to, careful with this word, but as a means to partition the data, not to be confused with network partition, right? So the other word that people use for this is shard, right? As in, oh no, I think I just sharded. So, yeah, shard and partition in this sense are synonyms, but please don't be confused about partition's other meaning in the context of an unpredictable and uncontrollable event separating nodes, as opposed to a very deliberate attempt to partition, a very deliberate attempt to spread the data around to achieve parallelism. So this is really a subject that we're going to talk about a lot more in a couple weeks when we move into module 4 of this class, parallelism and scaling. So this is an important distributed systems topic that we have not talked about in class that comes up in the paper. And then there's one really important one that I hope one of you will point out, relevant to the first half of this class and the midterm. Yeah?
Oh, is it conflict resolution?
Conflict resolution using what mechanism? Huh?
Right first.
Say again? Sorry?
Can you lock up the application to decide that, or to
Well, so there's one, like, there's a fallback, right? That's like application specific. And I love this, right? Because this is
That's right,
basically
Linz.
Lindsay's lecture in a nutshell, right?
Right.
If you can't resolve the conflicts in the canonical way, which I hope one of you will provide an answer for, then, and because the canonical way, there isn't always a resolution, then you fall back to the semantics of the application and the fact that what you're modeling is a shopping cart, which acts like a set. The fact that you know that the operation of adding items to a set, it has this property that it's commutative, right? And we don't actually care if we resolve the contents of the cart from different replicas that might have seen the updates in different orders. Because if we take two replicas and we combine, and we want to come up with like we take two replicas that have different data in them. How do we combine them?
Union.
We just take the union and put that on both, right? And then what does Amazon, does anybody remember what Amazon says about deletion? Do they say that? I don't think they say that. I don't even know what people are doing with tombstones yet. So what's a tombstone? A tombstone, the idea is you reify the deletion of an object as if it was an object. It's the tombstone for the object. And then in that way, you can treat tombstones as first-class objects that can be unioned up with everything else. You take your big union, and then every object that also has a tombstone, you take them both away. And that way you've made deletion commute with addition in a way that wouldn't clearly have happened before. But of course, this doesn't actually work in practice because there's something called doomstones. Are you familiar with doomstones? Well, in an asynchronous network, the deletion of an event reified as an object could arrive at some faraway server before the object. And you could have situations in which an object is never seen. This is though it was never there. Yeah? What's the right definition? To reify something is to take a concept that's sort of defined outside of a domain and to make it an object within the domain, right? To make an explicit object of. Is that a good definition for reify?
It's pretty good.
Yeah. I don't know.
Could you also spell it?
Yeah. In some sense, lamp
That's not how I spelled it.
reify logical time into messaging. Like logical time was there, but it wasn't part of the language of discourse. But by putting a Lamport timestamp on every message, we've like reified time into the discourse. And you're taking something and making it explicit, making it an object that you can name and talk about. It's a very important concept. And that's why I don't have a good definition for it. It's a word I use so often I don't even know what it means. Okay, where was I? Oh. Come on, Noah. What is the conflict resolution mechanism? Generic conflict resolution
Last
mechanism
right
we study
wins?
in this class that doesn't have to do with the data types.
Causal order.
Yeah, causal, vector clocks basically, right? The idea is, if I track causality using vector clocks, and I have two nodes, this guy thinks x equals 1, and she thinks x equals 3, if I just know the values of the variables, when they talk to each other, they don't know how to reconcile. Now, if I talk to each other, I'm skipping ahead. We'll be talking about that today, what it means for replicas to talk to each other. But if they talk to each other, they wouldn't know which one should win. Yeah?
So this is the same as last right wins?
I'm going to write that over here. I think we should be careful with this because I think, like, depending on who's using this phrase, it can potentially mean different things. But I'll come back to that in just a moment. So, x equals 1, x equals 3, right? If we just know the values, we don't know how to resolve it. But it might be the case that some client had come along and read x and got back x equals 1. And then later wrote x is 3. Okay? So what does that mean about the relationship between the event that made x1 and the event that made x3? Let's call this A, and let's call this B.
A happens before B.
A happened before B using Lamport's relation, right? And why do I say that? Well, because A actually caused B, maybe.
It could have.
It could have caused B, right? Because indeed, the logic here could have been, right? Like x equals x plus 2, or something, right? Because the client did this, x is 3, after reading x was 1, in some sense, A happened before B, right? And if we had put vector clocks on these things, that would reflect that, right? Like maybe this was set by some clients as 1, 0, 0. And then if this happened after this, this vector clock would be strictly bigger than that, right? So it might be something like 1, let's say 0, 1. Right? That means that if these replicas talk to each other, they know what to do. This is a more recent write than this one. This write clobbered this one, at least from the point of view of the client writing it. Ergo, when we fix things up, x is just 3. There's no ambiguity, because if something's causally dominated by something else, that thing clobbered it. In some sense, this might be what somebody might mean by last writer wins. But let's make things even more complicated. Now let's imagine that this process didn't happen the way I described it. In fact, we don't know what the process was, but for some reason, we have 101 over here, and let's say this is x is 2, and this is 110 over here. Okay? So these two talk to each other, and what do they determine? I don't know, like A and B are concurrent. And what does it mean that A and B are concurrent? It means causality does not order A and B for us. So we're back where we started from. Now what do we do? Okay. Amazon would say, put them both in the cart. Now the cart contains x equals 3 and x equals 2. Okay, perfect. Other systems that implement the semantics last writer wins, what they would do is they would say, in addition to the vector clock, there was a timestamp associated with the process that wrote it. This guy wrote it at 107, and this guy wrote this at 12:04, and this is PM. They say, well, it's a tie. They're concurrent. And I have to break the tie. And I know that everybody's going to see the same timestamp, so this is a deterministic break of the tie. So x equals 3 it is, with 101. Problem is, this write has like disappeared like it never happened. Yeah?
Just wondering, who puts the timestamp there?
Well, that's the question. So, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's super subtle. The easy answer, and the way that Cassandra would do it, because it's an unprincipled database, is that the client picks the timestamp when they do the write.
Right.
And that's fine. It's still deterministic, but it's not fair because I could pick a really high timestamp. Yeah?
You're just wondering, like, if A and B are concurrent and from different clients, then their timestamps don't necessarily have to match up.
Sure they do. What is the likelihood that that two nodes create the same high precision timestamp? And if they were to, I could break the tie with their names or something. So that's not an issue. The issue is that it's gameable, right? I could pick sometime in 2020, and my write always wins against any concurrent writes. So, but how could you get around it?
Database picks the timestamp.
Yeah, like for example, you could say the picker of the timestamp is the first node that the client talks to. In fact, you're going to do this in homework 4. Picker, or maybe homework 3. Picker of the timestamp is the first node that the thing talks to, and when it propagates around, it holds on to that timestamp from the first write. So that, because if the timestamp kept changing, that would happen. All right. Now, what the hell is this business about nodes talking to each other here? Yeah, this is good. So, I think this is pretty much all there is to say about Dynamo. It's this amazing paper that changed the way a lot of academics think about large-scale storage. It came out at a time when we were all thinking about ways to make, slicker, strongly consistent Byzantine fault-tolerant stuff because we like to solve hard problems. And meanwhile, in industry, everybody's saying, not only don't we care about Byzantine fault-tolerance, we don't even care about consistency. All we care about is going fast and making money. It was a true story, and it changed the direction of a lot of academic research. To be like, we are solving the wrong problems. Right. Oh, but then going back to this deletion thing, they point out in the paper that, okay, this whole commutativity under union thing is great if all you're doing is adding things to a card, but if you're deleting things from a card, things can get tricky. And indeed, they admit, in Dynamo, sometimes after conflict resolution, deleted items reappear in the card. Do you remember what Amazon said about that? They said, we don't care. If stuff reappears in the card, we make more money. And if the customer's really pissed off, they'll return it, and we can apologize.
Well, they let you keep it.
Yeah, or you can just have it. Yeah, I mean, like, who cares? Is basically the takeaway, which is, I don't know, it's interesting. It's a very practical paper. It changed the way I thought about a lot of stuff. So. Anyway, if you haven't read it, read it. It's cool, and it's on the text. So, let's see here. So, I jumped ahead a little bit there talking about Dynamo. Arguably, I should have talked about conflict resolution before. But in a quorum replicated system, obviously, we can get into situations like the one I just showed you, in which one node thinks that x equals 2, and one node thinks that x equals 1. And yeah, maybe they have that. Why can we get into this situation? How can we ever get into a situation in which two replicas disagree? In what sense are they replicas anyway, if they disagree? What would have been the settings of our quorum system to get into this mess?
Some right less than n.
Yeah, some right less than n. Certainly it could be that the right is 1 or something like that, right? But if the right was less than n over 2, right? Then we could have gotten into a situation where the two conflicting rights, right? There's a client over here who wanted to say x equals 1, and a client over here who wanted to say x equals 2, could have succeeded without there even being a single node that saw both, right? To arbitrate. Okay, we're on the same page. Which means we need to figure out how to resolve them in some other way after the fact. So broadly speaking, there's going to be two approaches that quorum systems use to resolve this. The first is called, academics call it anti-entropy. It means against uncertainty, I guess. But there's a colloquial word for this. Does anybody know what it is? That you may have seen in software engineering jobs or internships or whatever?
Stability.
Huh?
Stability.
Stability? No, I mean,
Reliability?
no. Gossip. Or epidemic propagation. The idea is, if we want a system to be partition tolerant, we have to consider its operation in every possible partition. We have to consider the most unfriendly possible partition. Right? So if we want nodes to be able to repair the sort of tribe after some kind of conflict, they need to be able to do it in a way that makes the weakest possible assumptions about network connectivity. Now, for example, if the answer is every node needs to like open up a socket to every other node and like mind meld, that would like fix it. But that wouldn't be very good, because then you could always be like, well, I can invent a world in which you never actually get to mind meld ever, because at any given time, there's a partition here, and that partition heals, but guess what? As soon as that partition heals, there's a partition here, and so on and so forth, right? So we want it to be that like information can epidemically propagate across the nodes in an opportunistic fashion. Whenever connectivity heals, you talk to whoever you can freaking talk to. But you want it to be the property that eventually, like gossip, if pairs of people talk to each other, anti-entropy is sometimes called pairwise anti-entropy, just to make it a more weird big term, right? I could get everybody in this room to know something if I came up with a protocol in which I said, at certain intervals, I flip a coin about who I want to talk to, and then I go tell them something. And then I tell them and everybody else, at certain intervals, flip a coin, pick a partner, tell them what you know. Can you imagine how quickly that information would spread across this room? Exponentially quickly, right? And it could spread across this room even at any given time only two people could talk to each other. Now obviously it won't spread exponentially quickly in that case, but it'll spread, right? So that's the basic idea behind pairwise anti-entropy. Every node is going to, at regular intervals, randomly choose another node and attempt to connect to it. And they're going to connect to each other. And for the duration of that connection, they're going to share everything that they know. Here's what I think all the values, all the variables are in their vector class. And when they're done, those two replicas have exactly the same state. Right? And if they get interrupted halfway, that's fine. They try again later. And then eventually they'll have exactly the same state. Yeah?
What if that first node tells that node that x is equal to 1 and the other one tells that one that it's equal to 2? Which one will it pick?
Well, what do you think? Which one wins?
X equals 1.
X is 1 surely wins, because whoever wrote x equals 1 wrote it in a world in which x was 2 with that vector clock, right? So we know what to do now. As I said a moment ago, if vector clocks were incomparable, that wouldn't work. And we'd have to come up with something else, maybe the timestamp, maybe set union. Yeah? Why not always do set union? Wait a minute. Set union always works. Why are we doing vector clocks?
It doesn't always work.
Why?
Items, like if you're doing a shopping cart, then sure. But like if you're doing math on a variable?
Right, absolutely. But Dyanmo is doing shopping carts, so
right.
Why did it do vector clocks? Why the extra mechanism?
Suits Dynmo's use case.
Why?
Doesn't necessarily, because it's just a shopping cart, right? Like Pete said, if you're trying to do some computation, you don't want.
No, what I'm asking is, in Dynmo, there's conflict resolution mechanism 1, vector clocks, and then there's sort of fallback conflict resolution mechanism 2, set union. Why didn't we just do set union? And more broadly speaking, if all your updates are commutative, why would you rub vector clocks on it? Yeah?
Well, because we want solutions to work at least.
Yeah, I think that's the answer, right? I think that's the answer. Is, first of all, they were smart software engineers. They wrote a bunch of mechanisms, maybe more than they needed, and they wanted to tell the world about it. But I think more fundamentally, that problem that they mentioned with deletions will happen much less frequently if you use vector clocks. Right? It's going to be just this weird edge case. Right? Yeah.
Isn't vector clock also grow in the size of the node instead of the size of the cart?
Well, but you're always doing both. So you're not getting any saving, right? Because you always have to fall back to this if this doesn't work, and you never know when you're going to have two conflicting updates, right? So it's not like you're saving doing the card. So I really think it just comes down to that, is that maybe when they were writing Dynamo, they wanted it to apply to more things than just cards, in which case vector clocks is a pretty cool, generic conflict resolution mechanism, but maybe more fundamentally, most of the deletion anomalies are going to be ruled out by vector clocks because they preserve the ordering. And generally, you don't delete something unless you saw it. So in general, the deletion operation will have whatever add operation in its causal past, right? Okay, cool. Where was I? Yeah, so these two talk to each other and they resolve it. There's another mechanism known as read repair. And repair works differently. It doesn't involve nodes talking to each other at all. It actually enlists the help of the client. Under the sort of under the intuition, that's very often, like the client is often the first person to observe a conflict. Right? In a strongly consistent system, that's exactly what we're concerned about, is that the client might see a conflict and then know that the system wasn't strongly consistent. But in a weakly consistent system, it's just a fact of life that the client will sometimes see conflicts, which means that the client is in a great place to lend a hand, right? So let's imagine instead of these two things just sort of waking up at some periodic interval and talking to each other, let's say there was a client out here who wanted to read X, right? And let's say that R was 2 in this particular quorum replication system, right? So that client goes out and sends their read to these two servers, and the read comes back, right? So this client, what does this client do? So they get x equals 1 with 101 and x equals 2 with 011. So what do they know?
Read hasn't happened.
What do they know? What is the value of x? Oh wait, they can't. Sorry, my bad. I didn't give you enough information. What is the value of x? It's 1. Okay, and they know that, which means they can like compute on x, whatever reason they ask for x, they can like go do it, right? And then they can go right back to this guy and say, dude, x is 1 with vector clock 1, 1. I know I can do that. I was the first person to spot the inconsistency. So as part of the protocol, I can just do one more round and like fix up the inconsistency. Is everybody clear on that? So there's two different ways to clear up inconsistencies. Do the replicas do it, or does the client do it? Which is better?
Sorry.
What everybody thinks read repair is better? Anti-entropy is better? Why do we have to choose? So like read repair is problematic, right? Because a conflict that nobody ever spots won't get repaired. Although arguably repairs. Right. Anti-entropy is not that great because it only is as up to date as the periodic interval with which they talk and the particular stochastic dissemination pattern that happens in the network as they randomly talk. Right? So sometimes what you do always is you do both. You repair the conflict with anti-entropy or read repair, whichever happens first, because you want the conflict to be repaired ASAP. So at the cost of a little bit less economy of mechanism, the practical system always does both things. Yeah? You might be able to get away with read repair in a really heavy workload, where you thought your reads are always roughly touching all the keys. Everybody clear on that? So like, if you have set your R and W low enough that what you have is not a strongly consistent system, then you will have conflicts. And you have to have a way to repair them. And these are the two canonical ways to repair them. I believe Dyanmo did both. Okay, so there's a couple things we could do now, because that's midterm complete. One thing we could do is start moving into the next topic. That's kind of what I want to do. But since I love you all so much, maybe we could take a minute in the middle of the class and do a quick ask me anything about the exam. For those of you who don't read the outset and didn't come to the bonus office hours today, for example, which went pretty good. Let's take, what time is it, 3:15? Let's take, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and do an AMA. And if we don't, if we run out of questions, I'll just go right into it. So the next subject, my favorite subject in the whole class, is the high-level subject of protocols that achieve agreement in a fault-tolerant way across a large set of computers. I like phrasing it as agreement, because agreement, when you say it so abstractly, contains a number of really hard problems that have very similar properties but different solutions. Problems like the problem of atomically committing a composite change on a bunch of nodes. So for example, moving an item from one node to another involves deleting it from the one node and adding it to the other. But you want that to happen in a way that is atomic, where it's not in 2 places at once or in 0 places at once. That's super hard. You kind of have to get both computers to agree about the move and agree to sort of reveal the move simultaneously. So that's hard. Another hard problem with distributed systems is the problem of leader election. You have a bunch of computers that appear symmetrical, but now you want one of them to be special. Just one, not two, not zero. Turns out that's super hard. Right? So, for example, if you had a bunch of computers and you wanted to do primary backup, you'd probably want to elect one of them as a leader. Electing some leaders is easy. Electing no leaders is really easy. Electing one leader is super hard. It involves agreement among all the nodes in a way that you can't go back. And you need to achieve agreement even though nodes could crash or be arbitrarily slow. You need to not disagree. Another problem is failure detection, right? We've already agreed that that's hard, right? Because it's more or less impossible to tell the difference between a slow node and a dead node. But in order to, for example, decide that a primary is down and to move to a new view in which a backup becomes the primary, given that you could be mistaken, you have to sort of suspect the node and then reach agreement with everybody. And we all agree that that node's down, and we're going to shun them from now on. Like if they come, they're like, "I'm not dead." You're just like, "No, I don't even hear you. You're dead." It's like there's one type of thing. It's exactly that thing to bring out your dead thing, right? Because it's like, "I'm not dead yet." It's like, "Shut up. You're in the dead card, right?" Well, yeah, that works if we could all agree to shun the person, but if even one person doesn't shun them, now we have split brain. And then most generally, the problem of having a bunch of computers agree upon a single value, x equals 1, in the presence of faults, is a problem known as consensus. It's actually the hardest problem that you could possibly solve in distributed systems. It's so hard, indeed, that it's impossible. And a really important impossibility result called FLP is probably the last impossibility result study in the class establishes that under a bunch of normal assumptions, the assumptions that we make in this class, that networks are asynchronous and protocols behave deterministically otherwise, it's impossible to achieve consensus. Consensus could never terminate. So all of these problems are the problem, if you squint your eyes, of getting a bunch of computers to achieve agreement in a way that tolerates faults. And we'll spend 3 weeks on this. We'll basically talk about this until we start talking about like the last topic in the class, which is how do we use computers to make stuff fast. So in the last 15 minutes of class today, we'll talk, I've already taken 5 minutes to talk about agreement, but I'll talk for another 10 or 15 minutes about it. But until then, what can I do to make you feel okay about the exam in 15 minutes?
How many questions are there?
What difference does that make? Because not all questions are the same, so 700.
Is an hour long enough time for the midterm?
Yeah, I think so. In my experience, it doesn't have the same questions as previous midterms, but it's like the same number, it's 11 pages long. And typically, most people